Welcome to Audiogyan with Kedar Nimkar, a podcast that documents insightful conversations with Indian designers, artists, musicians, writers, thinkers, and creatives of all types. Catch us on iTunes or visit audiogyan.com for more Gyan sessions. Here's your host, Kedar Nimkar.
I found the ultimate answer to the age old long debate of what you should eat, how you should eat. Is non veg good? Is veg more sattvic? Is homegrown food the healthiest? Or plant based meat is the big revolution? Well, I have my answer, and this is eat according to your profession. If you're an athlete or a soldier, it's a crime not to eat non veg, which is possibly the biggest source of protein. While if you are a software engineer working at your desk, eat which is easily digestible and keeps you fresh. Well, this is not an introduction to any of the food startups. Today I have Ashwin Ramachandran with us on Audiogyan. Ashwin is a chef and runs a small kitchen in South Mumbai called Milliways. He specializes in Asian food. He has over 10 years of experience in the hospitality industry and has worked in ITC Hotels for more than 5 years. He's based out of Mumbai. I happened to meet Ashwin at FFX Festival this year and was curious to know his thoughts about food, especially his perspective to look at ingredients rather than the dish itself. So thank you, Ashwin, for giving your time, and it's a real pleasure to have you on Audiogan.
Thank you so much for having me over.
So yeah, thank you. The overall conversation I wanted to have with you was is cooking an art, or is it a craft, which we briefly spoke about last time when we were at the festival.
Right.
And also wanted to understand your take on how important are ingredients in any dish. Yeah, so that's the premise.
Right.
So if you can start by telling what makes a perfect recipe. I mean, is it the ingredients? Is it the timing? Or, like, if you want to go further abstract, is it the love which you put in while making a particular dish?
Yeah, sure. We'll start off with this. It's a fantastic question, and it's also one of the first things that comes to anybody's mind when they are what makes a perfect recipe. It's one of the first questions that comes to your mind when you think about cooking food. Like you rightly said, ingredients, timing, and love. These are all necessary components in order to make a great dish. But firstly, there is no such thing as a perfect recipe. A recipe on its own is no guarantee of a good product. The people who are making the recipe or executing it are the ones that can ensure a good end product will come out of it. But apart from these three ingredients, that is ingredients, timing, or love, what is as or if not more important is something called as intention, which basically decides your function and your attitude towards what you're going to create. So more, whether you have a recipe or not, or whether you're just cooking ad hoc, like completely from your own mind, without anything structured around what you want to do, if your intention is solid, then the other things fall into place. At least this is what I have found when we've had instances where people have come up to us and said that let's cook something different, let's cook something that's completely out of the box. I've had this so many times. I want to eat something different. You're not prepared for this, right? You don't have a recipe in your head. They just tell you that, okay, I want to have one fish, I want to have one this ingredient, I want to have something else, and then they say, make me something. So at those times, it's the intention of that I want to feed this person something new, something different, something that will probably make their evening really great. So it starts with that, and then slowly you get in your ingredients, you think about what is it that is available, and then of course then timing comes into place, wherein how long are you cooking those ingredients, what are you subjecting it to, are you marinating it, are you breaking it down, are you going to be cooking it really fast, is there any particular, or are you not going to cook it at all, are you going to just cure it? So these things is where time comes into place. And then lastly, there is, yes, like you said, there is love is important. This is probably comes love on both parts, probably from the side of the person who's creating the dish, a love towards profession, and the consumer also, a love towards eating or enjoying or relishing that experience. I think both of them are equally important in this equation. So that if there is a perfect recipe, then it is all a bunch of intangible components that make it great.
Hmm. And is there any other axis or any other parameter on which good food or good recipe or good dish is measured against? Because these were the three which I thought of, but I'm sure there must be a lot of other parameters being discussed in the chef world. Uh, is there anything like that?
When you look at this from a very professional point of view, all kitchens, in spite of everything, all kitchens and restaurants, except for those who have a daily changing menu, most successful restaurants that have a nice, good, standardized menu that has been running strong for years rely on a standardized recipe. It's not a perfect recipe, it's something that they call as a standardized recipe. So that is almost like a Bible or a guide which people refer to. So that establishment of that standardized recipe, that is important. Is it perfect? Probably not, because um, every time a new chef comes to finish that dish, they add his or her touch to it. So it changes the final end product in that very small way. But in spite of everything, the biggest thing that any recipe or any restaurant aspires to, or a kitchen aspires to, is for consistency. So in order to deliver that form of consistency, you require a recipe. So if you're
Hmm.
discussing as to the importance of a recipe, that is the importance of the recipe. Whether it's a perfect recipe or not is questionable. Nothing really is perfect. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
when it
So
is,
I think, yeah, sorry to interrupt, but I think what we'll do is we'll come back to this in more detail
yeah, yeah, sure.
as we go along. But since you mentioned about intention and timing, love, ingredients as well,
Hmm.
if you can help us, like, help me understand or draw a parallel of the chef world, where how does things change when you are like a chef for a chef mainly in a fine dine restaurant versus I'm guessing that it's more measured and whereas like a home cook like a bawarji or a maharaj which we
Hmm.
have versus like a food which is served in langar. So how do these work and how do these individual cooks or individual people look at ingredients, timing, and the other things which are required to serve those people?
Right. But it's actually one of the most fascinating things that you can come across. I've had the chance and the opportunity to do work with cooks and chefs from all these different schools that you're just talking about, and each of them have this really unique approach to as to how they want to prepare the food. Their end goals and their end games are slightly different, so that changes the way they think about or plan their entire process. But intention wise, it is fantastic what they're all trying to achieve. If you look at a fine dining chef, for them, like how we previously spoke, perfection, it is one of those things that they gun for, where there is no scope or even a minute chance of error to be possible on a plate or on a dish, because it is under extreme inspection. Each product is under extreme inspection. So for them, everything from the way the produce comes in, to the way it's shaped, to to the way it's finished and it's pruned or it's trimmed, and the way it's cooked, each of those stages have like 10 times or 20 times more focus given to than what you would expect in, say, a normal restaurant, or say a banquet style or a bulk cooking kind of food, because the experience is extremely personal. So the attention becomes personal to such a level that there is absolutely no margin for error. But if you were to shift that same perspective to, say, a langar style of food, which is commonly called as, say, a banqueting system of cooking, where you're cooking for a lot of people, then your priorities change. You're trying to create the biggest possible quantity of food at the best possible quality. So you're trying to balance two very, very difficult things over here, which means that the kind of attention that you're giving to things, the parameters that you're giving to, suddenly shift. It's no longer located on one plate, but right now it is how fast can you get really good food out. So your processes change, the way you're executing your ingredients change, what kind of menus are on offer change. If you're offering it for, say, something like a langar, which has a religious necessity to it, then in that case there are certain restrictions or allowances that come in, which based on which you can cook food, uh, which changes the entire dynamics. So, for example, if I'm making dal for, say, 15,000 people, the kind of quantities itself that I'm looking at are unfathomable. I'm using so many amounts of pulses. I'm using so much amount of water. The salt is different. And all of these ingredients behave differently when you cook them in bulk. Although people think that if you take a particular recipe that's meant for 4 portions, if I were to feed 40 people out of that, I just have to multiply the recipe by 10 times. But a recipe doesn't follow that methodology. It doesn't. More often than not, as you increase the quantity of preparation, the ratio of ingredients changes accordingly. It is not a very linear proportion. So there is a lot of judgment that comes into play when you're cooking for people, like when you're cooking in these volumes. A chef's personal judgment or her personal capacity to understand how these quantities will play out come into question. For example, if I'm predicting how much dal are 15,000 people going to consume, now it is not something that that answer I cannot come to if I don't have an understanding or a prior experience of how these systems operate. If you were to take a fine dining chef and put her into a system where they have to cook a meal for 20,000 people, it will become difficult for them because you suddenly change the entire dynamics by which they calculate the food production. So that is where this comes in. When you're coming to something like home food, then it is personal on such a level that even fine dining is left behind. You're asking someone to come within your house and cook for you a meal that basic function is to provide nutrition to you and your loved ones. The level of commitment that kind of responsibility has is insane. It does not have the kind of finesse or the kind of complications that banqueting or fine dining food will have. But then it is the weight of the responsibility is massive, and it is a very the biggest factor in this is your emotional quotient that comes into it. Because if you're feeding someone at your house, if you're feeding your child or if you're feeding your spouse food and you've given that responsibility to someone else, ki, please feed us, then it is a massive thing to do. And like you said, the maharaj or the bhaji or the cook who's at home who's doing it works within a specific set of instructions. So it doesn't matter what a standardized recipe is. It is completely on the preferences of those small bunch of people who are cooking. So it changes accordingly the way the food is produced. I mean, is that recipe or is that dish something that somebody else will enjoy? It doesn't matter whether another person outside this subset will enjoy it or not. It is a very personal perspective. So it changes the way the same dish is made. I mean, like you could enjoy a dum aloo in your version in your house in one particular way, but मेरे घर पे ऐसे ही बनता है, तो this is how we make it. My Maharaj makes it this way. So if that answers your question in
Yeah. In fact, it's a nice segue to the ingredients part because, so before that, if you can also, I wanted to ask this question in the end, but yeah. So is food making a craft or is it an art? Because now I would say in case of, because now I'm more interested in understanding like fine dine mein kya hota hai in that, especially is it an art or is it a craft?
right. So this is a question that I also like. I have a lot of arguments with myself about this. Is food craft or is it art? Is a I think it falls in like this uh, gap between the two forms, two schools. That food is made by craftsmen. Like at our core, we are craftsmen. We have a love for a certain craft of cooking, and we take that and we are craftsmen who create stuff from the components that we have. But because of our personal relationship with food, like how an individual reacts when they consume food, it has the capacity to affect you emotionally at such a deep level that it is extremely possible that the food that the thing that the craftsman has made, you will perceive it to be so great that it reaches a level of divinity, like it reaches a level of beauty that might just qualify it for art. It is a very personal and a very subjective thing. I get that, but then I think and I thought really hard about this, okay, because it is something that it is an argument that we've had before. I mean, like, it is the current thing for the last 10 years, is 10 or maybe even 15 years, is that the plate that the chef is creating is a work of art. Is it really a work of art? I mean, that person has thought about so many different things, and they have created this extremely perishable system. I mean, it's a very short-lived system that will probably be over the minute you have the last spoon. And which is so, unlike other forms of art, or say even music or something, I mean, I don't know, like sculpture, like all of these things are products that can stand the test of time, right? If I want, I could create a sculpture, I could create a product, and it could stay for 1,000 years, 1,500 years, 2,000 years. Music could be replicated in onto a disc form or something like that, and it could then be multiplied into a cassette or whatever, on an online format or whatever. It could be done in these forms, and it would last through time. I could put it in a time capsule, and 20,000 years from now, somebody, if they have access to those electronics, they can listen to that music. And art, of course, is a painting. It's colors that has been put on a canvas. So something like this is preservable. It will last through time. But food doesn't have that benefit, right? It has a tendency to be, it has a short shelf life, and that experience of that food, once it is consumed, is there only within your perspective. There is nobody else in the world who can enjoy that perspective. So there is a question: can we classify it as art? But then at the same time, we tend to value stuff once it becomes perishable. An artist or a creator, once they've created their works and then they pass away, the value of their work shoots up. I mean, if you were to look at a dish from that perspective, that the artist has created, the chef has created a product that is been given the requisite amount of attention in process, in ingredients, in execution, and just through the love that person has put through into creating the dish. If that chef meets all these requirements and creates a dish that can satisfy all your senses, then why wouldn't you call it a piece of art? I mean, not just from a visual perspective, from any perspective, why would you not call it a piece of art? Does it make the person an artist? Probably not. That person is still a craftsman. But that work that they have done has been elevated from a piece of craft. It has now become so good that it becomes rarefied, and can now be classified as an art form. It's a little bit of
I like the part where you said it's about perspective, because I don't know, maybe maa ke haath ka khana is an art,
is a,
because it's very subjective,
right.
it's very experiential. It's because I remember there is this famous Marathi, like everything, like the biggest artist, like one of the biggest artists in Marathi, Pula Deshpande,
Ha,
and he says that when you hear the word thalipit,
ha.
you not only remember the dish, but you also remember the place where you sat and you eat, the makhan or the loni which was dropped by your mom while dropping the bangles clinging, and it's a complete
It is
experience.
a
So
complete
in that
experience.
context, yeah, it's in that context, it can be qualified as an art.
So there's a very wonderful thing that happens with food. Okay, so
Yeah.
because food operates on multiple senses, it's not just one particular sense, or like a sense of sound or a sense of vision or a sense of taste that's operating. It's assaulting multiple senses at the same time, and our reference point to that becomes through multiple senses. And because it is something that we are fundamentally attached to, like, it is a part of our survival guide, right? Consumption of nutrition is necessary for survival. So our emotional attachment to it is in such an extreme form that if you give someone good food, all their senses are being exposed to this dining experience, and it very deeply and emotionally changes you, that meal experience. And it's something that chefs constantly want to pursue. If you look at some of the best cooks and chefs that you come across, when they're creating a dish, they want to give you that emotional connect. Like, for example, if a five-star hotel has a vada pav on its menu, um,
Mhm.
when a person is eating a vada pav, he or she wants to experience that flavor of that street food, that quickness of the roadside stall. So it is something that emotional connect is very necessary. Like you rightly said, it is a complete experience, and food is amongst the few things that I have seen that does that to you. Like flavors, aromas, they will take you back through time, and it will remind you of stuff that is absolutely unbelievable, and it just changes the way you completely perceive food then. Like you said, this thali
Hmm.
pit and the loni. I'm sure that aroma of that loni melting on top of the hot thali pit is something that every time you smell melted loni, you will be taken back to that experience where you're having it on top of the paratha. It happens to
Yeah.
me all the time. I love that aroma. Like I just can't stop.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So, like, I think this conversation is going to go further abstract because the next thing which I want to ask you is again just going deeper into the ingredients itself. So,
Okay.
what has been, are there any patterns or what is your insight about having correlation between pairing ingredients in dishes or like different types of foods? Because we have a set format, right? There's a like typically there's an appetizer in which you recommend more, say, like non-acidic or
Right.
acidic
Right.
ingredients,
Mm.
and then there's a main course, and then the chasers follow a certain pattern.
Right.
So if you can just tell about that, then maybe I can like understand.
So the whole one of the biggest challenges of when someone comes to sit in front of me to eat, my biggest challenge is that if I'm cooking, I want to show off my meal experience. Like I want to show the person who's sitting in front of me that this is what I can do. I want to blow your mind away. But if I feed that person too much food too fast in a very erratic manner, the possibility that that person will not be able to enjoy the entire gamut of the experience is a very high one. So ideally, when you want to, so because you're talking about these different things that like an appetizer or a main course and all, why is it that this format is so commonly followed? A lot of it, firstly, it has to do, if you look at a very basic level of how we respond to food, it is basically it is done in order to trigger your hunger in the right manner. Okay, so my meal will start with something that's chatpata or slightly spicy or tangy, a little sweet, little bit of explosions happening everywhere. I want to make you feel hungry. The whole dish is designed to trigger your hunger. And so appetizers work that way, which is why they are appetite. They whet your, it's meant to whet your palate and get you ready for the next course. Right. So appetizers work that way, as in where they trigger your palate and they trigger your hunger. And after that comes the next set of ingredients, which are meant to satiate you and make you happy and make you feel good about the entire eating experience. So you want something that can fulfill you in a way. Main courses tend to do that very well, depending on what you choose as your main course. I'm like, for example, if I want to have like a nice home style chicken curry, it'll probably hit the spot much better than say a French version of a roast chicken for me. Like it's a personal perspective because I'm from this local area. For me, a home style chicken curry will be better than say a French style roast chicken. And then there are the whole set of accompaniments or chasers, as you have called it, like which elevate the meal experience that you're having. It's meant to elevate your already great experience that you're having. You need to take it further. But at the core of all of this is our need to feed ourselves very basic fundamental food that uh, provides nutrition to us. So the staple comes into play over here, which depending on which part of the world you are in, your main staple changes. A lot of Asian countries a lot of countries in Asia have very strong staple systems. Like we have got breads, we've got rice, we've got other parts of the world have corn as their staple. Some other parts have tubers as their staple. So there is a starch component that forms a major chunk of your staples because it is the main provider of energy for you. How does the food, your main course, play along with that main starch is where a lot of magic is what that happens. And then of course, once you're at this place where you've eaten such good food, you want to end it on a high note, so you tend to go for something that's sweet, and which will probably take you, satiate you completely, because sugar tends to do that. You're working on those basic needs of your brain, which is basically energy and sugar. So a dessert at the end is the perfect way to make you happy. So chefs exploit these systems, and we create entire stories around this very basic format, where it takes you through highs and lows of keeping your appetite healthy through the meal, and then giving you a treat at the end, and basically making you feel nice as this trip ends out. But that
Wow.
is just one part of it. How you get this basic function of, providing you nutrition in a fun manner, um, i- the whole game that happens, like, is on a very subconscious level. It works on how your senses perceive food. How are you perceiving something like a flavor system in your body, or in your tongue, or in your palate? How are you perceiving it, and how is it emotionally connecting you? I mean, there is a very common saying कि मतलब खाना जितना भी खा लो, but अगर if you don't enjoy the meal experience, कभी लगेगा नहीं बदन पे. It's a very very abstract statement that a lot of people say, मतलब कि नहीं लगेगा बदन पे if you don't enjoy the experience of it. तुम जो भी खा लो कुछ फर्क नहीं पड़ना है, which might be true, because your emotional attitude to the food affects, uh, in a very major way, it affects the way you absorb the food into your body. These are all like small hacks or tools that chefs consciously or subconsciously use. I could design a meal which would basically be like, for example, within a pani puri, something like a pani puri, I could do the puri of the pani puri. I could do a khatta, meetha, tangy, spicy stuff just stuffed inside it. You don't know it when you look at the puri from outside. You probably won't figure it out. But the minute you put it into your mouth and you take your first bite, there's an explosion in your tongue. There's the crunchiness from the puri. There is tastes like sweet, sour, salty happening on your tongue. Then there are so many flavors that your nose can perceive. That is happening. Your ears are able to hear this crunch. So there's some other sound system that's going on, depending on how you designed that puri to be. How well does it deceive the consumer? The play of vision comes into place. So you're having so many senses that are coming into play within one bite. Imagine this assault happening over a course of say 45 minutes, an hour, with different tricks and games coming in. There are so many things that you are doing to a person through just a simple meal experience. And if you're able to make their endorphins and their happy hormones explode and go crazy, then your meal is a successful meal. The person will go away being extremely satisfied physically, mentally, and emotionally. So when you pair ingredients, when you pair courses, when you do stuff like this that caters to all your senses and all your needs, that game is completely different than simply saying, like, okay, fine, you walked into a canteen, somebody's thrown a plate in your hand and you're eating. So it's
Hmm.
so different from how you do it, and chefs by nature want to exploit that system. It's a method where I can personally connect with you. It is a very personal thing. No, somebody cooking for something else, no matter uh, how you institutionalize the system by creating restaurants or creating a chain or something, the very fundamental act of cooking a meal for someone is very basic in nature. You're asking a person to perform duties that are very fundamental to them, and you're asking the consumers to go through a process that is extremely vital to them. In both the places, you're dealing with extreme emotional connect. So
Hmm. Hmm.
so throughout the process of, say, pairing ingredients, or providing a main course, or getting the staple in place, or creating a dessert, there are small things that come into play and which can make you happier or sadder. And there is something called as flavor pairing that is done. Okay, this
Hmm.
has been on in the last, like, we know something of it. Like, chefs have always known that two three ingredients tend to go well by nature. For example, apple and cinnamon goes well, or say cobra and lasun goes well, like in a coconut chutney, or chilies and cumin goes well. Like, these are things that people know through experience, that they taste well. So people decided to study this as to why does this happen, and a bunch of scientists and food theorists and food technologists got down together and they studied these systems, and they realized that there are a bunch of molecules that are there that are compatible in each other, and which is why these two ingredients seem to go together. And this then let out one complete it opened up one complete Pandora's box, and where which
Hmm.
basically heralded the age of flavor pairing, wherein stuff like coriander and strawberries were being paired, white chocolate with caviar was being paired. On paper it said that there are common volatile compounds that are common to both of them, so if you take these two ingredients and you combine them together, the finished product should on paper taste good because they have a lot of commonality between them. And it turns out that it is true that something as weird as a combination as white chocolate and caviar actually tastes fantastic because it has got something that's going on in it. And old school examples like apple and cinnamon clicked. There were so many other examples that clicked. But here's the fun
Hmm.
part: is that does that become like a guide to how to create food? It did in a lot of parts of the world. It did. Okay, the entire Western world and the European world like took that idea and they ran with it. There are some fantastic books that have come up on this. One of the books is called the Flavor Bible, and there are other books similar to it that have taken this idea and they've basically educated the common chef to understand what is it that they are doing and how can this make your food better. But then we realize something else, that the exact opposite of that is also applicable. And the biggest example of that is a country like India. There were studies done by some very very premier institutions in this country, and they tried to take the same approach, and they took traditional Indian ingredients like our masalas and our spices, and we have no dearth of essential oils and flavors in our country. Our country is probably like the birthplace of almost all, I don't know how many spices, so it's crazy.
Hmm.
So essential oils and flavors ke मामले में भी our country is like light years uh, ahead in the variety of systems that we used to exploiting. What they found out was
Hmm.
that the systems that they tried to see in Western flavor pairing systems, they were not applicable over here. In fact, ingredients that were completely opposite with absolutely nothing in common for some reason tend to do great together.
Hmm.
And that is one entirely different ball game. Like you take completely two completely contradictory ingredients that by their nature are not similar, but when you put them together they tend to form a product, a third completely different product that creates magic on a completely different level. It's not relatable in the same way as how flavor pairing in the Western system is, but over here in the Eastern system, or in our country at least, we've been cooking with these spices for ages. And like कि दाल के तड़के में हींग जबरदस्त लगता है जीरा और कड़ी पत्ते के साथ. I mean, it's a fantastic combination, and you want to have that with lentils. Each of those things do different things into your palate, but the end product is absolutely fantastic. I mean, if I were to serve you a dal with a tadka of kadi patta hing, and if I were to and jeera, and if I were to feed you a dal without this tadka and just ghee, I'm sure both of these experiences will be completely different with how you're having.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's so interesting, and you have like there's so many threads on which we can dwell more and like discuss more. But just keeping to the script which
Yeah,
I've done
yeah,
is that so how, like, since you mentioned that like there are these, so one thread is obviously going deeper and deeper and understanding how these compounds are formed, how these molecules interact, how these these two
right,
flavors
right.
pair with each other.
Yeah, yeah,
And then there is another extreme end where not the another extreme but the interim step where you try and identify that ठीक है चलो मतलब at a DNA and whatever at a fundamental level there are certain things which are happening,
hmm.
but now I'm dealing with only dishes. I don't want to get into that granular science.
Okay, okay,
So if I want to ask, like, how important is training for a chef? I mean, because cooking,
hmm.
even if we call it an art or a craft, I'm sure it's much more. It was a means of survival. So
Right.
in the evolution cycle, it must be surely before art.
It is a system of
Yeah.
necessity. Yeah,
So yeah, I mean, then from that till today's fine dine restaurant, like, where did the need to get trained? First of all, is training required? And second is, I know this is like a slightly vague question. Yes, in a fine dine restaurant, you might need training, but at home you may or may not. But still, there are episodes which happen na कि रोटी ऐसे बनाते हैं यार,
Right.
तुम सीख लो पहले, whatever.
Hmm.
So, how do you define training in this entire scheme of things?
Okay, so there are two different things that have come up in your conversation. When we start off with looking at food as an evolutionary as a function of necessity, survival and reproduction are our basic um driving systems, right? Like we need to reproduce and we need to survive as a species or as any species. That's what they need to do. So survival come one of the most important components is provision for nutrition. So it started off there, and it has been a part of our system since day one, since our species began day one. But because our mind is the way it is, because we have the ability to connect different kinds of dots and create different systems out of it, we took to food in a way that has been unprecedented by any other species. And it has become one of those fundamental functions that has affected our evolution as a species very, very deeply. And like you rightly said, it originated much before art, much before technology, much before a lot of other things that have made life more interesting. But at the same time, what matters is that if we have the ability to create systems as complex as language, and then art, and then craft, and then music and technology, imagine that same intelligence is being used to carry a concept like food all the way through. So it is something that has been, and for the longest time it has always traveled by word of mouth. There was no written format of recording food, and the only way you could transfer knowledge of food from one generation to another was to teach somebody that art or craft, right? So teaching, at its core, is a form of training itself. When I'm teaching you a particular duty or a particular task, it is a form of training you. Is training important to become a chef? To become a chef, training is extremely important. Is training important to become a cook? I don't think it is. I mean, the question is, whom are you cooking for? Are you cooking for yourself? Are you cooking for
Mm.
your family? Because then that changes the dynamics of why the cooking is done. Why, if you were to look at why training is required from a professional perspective, why is training required? You require training because you need to be efficient in a kitchen, right? Efficiency is the core game. You need to be efficient as far as wastage of ingredients is done. You need to be efficient as far as electricity, power is consumed. You need to be efficient as far as gas is consumed. You need to be efficient as far as timing is concerned, because you have a very specific timing in which a particular dish is to be belted out, because you're being paid for certain services, and that payment requires a certain set of expectations. In order to deliver those expectations, training is necessary. So a chef can never be a good chef without training. Um, People might be naturally gifted at cooking, but when you call that person a chef, the environment in which that person operates suddenly changes. But if you look at that from a home perspective also, then it is different. If you live on your own, then what kind of meal are you cooking will define how regularly you do that kind of operations, right? If I stay alone, then I'm cooking for myself. I make an omelette, it's done in 10 minutes, I can go. But then if I stay in a house where I'm responsible for cooking for 3 or 4 people, I've got people older than me, younger than me, my own age group, and it is my job to provide nutrition to them. And I have time bound requirements, right? I need to do this at these times. Then suddenly I need to learn skills that become efficient. And then we come to the same but the same parallel, like how a chef in a kitchen operates, where efficiency becomes the norm. So similarly over here in the home also, efficiency becomes the norm. And then you learn to cook in a particular way, that becomes a habit, and a habit becomes a skill, and then that skill improves to become something that is better, and then that better product is then taught on to the next generation. This transfer of knowledge through training, through skill, through habit is evolving every generation, because no process can be repeated 100% exactly the same, right? Bad practices delete, good practices come in, shortcuts come in, certain processes, even though they're good for you, get thrown out in preference for convenience. So that evolves the way the food moves in. So if you're saying, is training important to be a chef, it is. Is training important to be a home cook? You can do without it, but it's a great thing if you can train yourself to be an efficient chef.
Correct, correct. Beautiful, beautiful. Uh, yeah, actually, I would like to conclude. I mean, I've been listening to some podcasts, some episodes related to food for quite some time now, and
Right.
this conversation on food, about food, has many different accesses, and plus it's endless because yeah, everybody is an expert and everybody can have an opinion and everybody, yeah. So yeah, it's very tough to like encapsulate anything in a particular episode, but I understand it's an ongoing conversation.
Right.
But just for the sake of this particular episode, I would like to conclude with one question which I was very curious to know,
Right.
is that um, as per like my understanding, there are like four elements, right? So earth, water, fire,
Hmm.
air. And according to few studies, it's said that Aristotle added ether,
Hmm.
the fifth element.
Right.
And there are numerous articles as well that if Aristotle had cooked, he would have more to say to the world.
Right.
So again, a very dear friend of mine is like sort of monk, and we keep discussing about food for a very like at length. And his aspiration is to reach a level that he can just live on one pot cooking.
Okay.
So I could see a lot of synergy or a lot of topics being discussed at the intersection of food and philosophy.
Right.
So if you can just conclude by like what is your take on that? Why is it so? Is it being heavily discussed within the hospitality industry, or at least in the chef community? And we'll see where what do you think about it? Yeah.
If you speak of Aristotle, the fifth ingredient that you were saying, the fifth ingredient, I'm sorry, the fifth component or the element that you're talking about, ether. In his philosophy, it was like when you're discussing about ether, it was that single factor that connected, that became the petri dish in which all these other four elements operated. Um, is food, would Aristotle have been a better philosopher if he cooked? Absolutely, it would have been. Some of the best sessions of thought that I know personally, people that I know personally, some of the best thinking that they have done is during the process of cooking. Once you become a decently passable good chef, you can allow a lot of activities to go on auto mode, sort of like cutting or chopping or stirring a kadhai, where and you can allow your brain to um, wander and think about larger things. If you look at it in the context of food and what Aristotle had to say, food is like that ether. It is at the core of a lot of our relationships with things around the world. So it is like that petri dish by which we can gauge how a person is. When we talk about do chefs discuss food philosophy? Of course we do. We discuss food philosophy. But the question is, in what context are we discussing it? With whom are we discussing? Are we discussing it on a Sunday night when we are dying under orders? Yeah, the question is like, why the hell is the world eating the way it is? Like, मतलब ये क्या चल रहा है? How am I dying tonight so badly when on other days I'm not eating food, when I'm not dying with business? And on a Sunday evening, I'm literally drowning in business because people are ordering so much food. It is unbelievable. What makes them order the way they are? What makes them order the way they do? That is one aspect of how a philosophy on food could work. But more importantly, amongst other things that we discuss is how is the system. What Another aspect that we discuss is that how is consumption, like food by nature is an act of consumption. So does it define you in a way? The way you consume, the way you heed to your desires. I mean, such fundamental attributes that food gives you relationship to. Does it define the person that you are? And if it does, then what kind of ramifications, philosophical ramifications that are there? What kind of ramifications are there? I mean, if you look at what Aristotle had to say, okay, one of the things that his philosophy had was something called as temperance. right? Which was basically your ability to exhibit control over something. And food is an act of consuming your something that you desire. So if you take something like how your nature is to desire stuff, you take something, an accessible example of it where you're consuming what you desire. If you can control that aspect, it speaks a lot about yourself. And I think in a way that is what, uh, you could take Aristotle's idea of, Aristotle's philosophy, and when you had to join it or link it with food, this is where it would come out to, is that, we look at food as something that provides us, um, happiness and emotional support, and it helps us understand ourselves in a way, because you're taking the environment that is outside you, you're processing it in a manner, and you're consuming it, you're making it a part of your own. I don't think there is anything that is more fundamentally beautiful than a concept like this, where your exist, where which describes your existence in a way where you, as an individual, you live in a society and you're a product of everything that you're being subjected to. You take all of that in, you assimilate it within yourself, you allow it to nurture you, and it makes you into something else, which is something exactly like what food does. Which is why I feel that philosophers have always fundamentally been hooked onto the idea of food. And I'm sure if you look at any school of philosophy, people who are a part of that school have an opinion on what must be consumed and how it must be consumed, what kind of food must be consumed. It is something that is very, very principal to the way they exist. And I'm sure that any religious or social philosophy or any form of philosophy that is meant for betterment of humankind will have something to say about food as its central component. I mean, like we said, survival is a necessary skill, and you need to have nutrition to survive. So, in that aspect, I think food forms that bridge that can answer a lot of questions in philosophy.
Wow, wow, yeah. We are recording this on 1st April 2020, where we are under lockdown
Okay.
because of the coronavirus. And somewhere, even eating habits or what we are eating, what are we consuming from the nature has resulted in some sort of changes in our, like, almost every aspect of our
Of
lives.
our day, yeah.
So yeah, yeah. So it's yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm just connecting the dot here, but cool. I think if you have to conclude by telling, like, how do cultures select what to eat, and what is happening with globalization, because you can find everything everywhere, right?
Right,
So in terms of ingredients,
right.
so yeah.
These are two, in a way, if you were to look at it, what a culture eats and how globalization is affecting it is such a linear thing, no? I mean, you can just draw a straight line and you can connect it. When you look at culture at one side and you look at globalization on the other side with food as the link, it's such a linear line. But if you were to look at it from another perspective, that culture is such a personal and subjective thing to a particular geographical boundary, or a particular social boundary, and globalization is like the destroying of that entire boundary. I mean, food operates on like
Mhm.
weird places in both of them. I mean, if you can establish an emotional connect within a set of people, then irrespective of what is going on in the world, how ingredients are coming into your system or not, if that emotional connect between the people and a link to their culture, their heritage, their history, and traditions is there, then it will help you face the onslaught of globalization of the food industry. That is one aspect of it, right, where you can still hold your own in spite of a plethora of ingredients coming to your doorstep now. On the other side, if you look at it, globalization has its own benefits. I mean, today people of my generation are eating cuisines that 30 years ago would have been absolutely unheard of. I run an Asian kitchen that serves ramen. 5 years ago or 7 years ago, if somebody would have told me, Ashwin, would you want to open up a ramen kitchen in Bombay? I was like, mad or what? चलेगा ही नहीं है. कौन करे? धंधा ही नहीं करेगा ये. I mean, people are just not wanting to experiment for something like this. But today, if you tell me that is Asian food like leading the game right now? Asian food is leading in amongst all the cuisines in India right now. Asian food is amongst the top. I mean, Italian has been doing it for quite some time, but then the way the Asian food scene has exploded, it is fantastic. And we're eating ingredients like dried fish and seaweed and um, octopus and raw fish. And 10 years ago, who would have been eating this? Globalization does wonderful stuff. Okay, it does some wonderful things where it introduces you to a set of ingredients um, which can explode the way you pursue nutrition. Mm, how cultures choose to do that is probably based on how it's marketed, how cool is it, does it provide, is it value for money, especially in a country like India? Is it value for money? Can this be something that we can go back to again and again? These are all factors that come in. India is like a very difficult market as far as uh, food trends are seen. I mean, now in urban situations and all, it's become pretty great. But then there are stories where great, massive corporate companies have come into India with their entire playset, and they have failed to create the kind of impact and rumble that they've done abroad. I mean, why is that? It's probably because of our culture, the way we eat. We are so agriculturally ground to our systems, and we have like such a. I might be boasting a bit about our country. I don't know. I might be wrong. I might be told I'm wrong on this, but I think that as Asian countries in general have this extremely deep organic connection to the way we consume our food. It has to do with the spices, the color, the flavors, the plethora of ingredients that we have, and the climate, and the kind of attitude that we have amongst with respect to each other, that just makes this whole system bloom. And we have been late to the globalization game of where food is homogeneous in a lot of the Western world, and as it travels eastwards, it's the way it's been absorbed into the system is slightly hodgepodge, and it's not gone the way other countries have taken it. But it is a gift, and it is also a sort of a curse. It is inevitable that we are heading towards a form of homogeneity in the way we eat food. If you were to look at our dietary patterns, say 100 years ago, 200 years ago, the human species, I'm not even talking about just geographically, the variety of food that we ate was insane. The staples that we consumed was insane. The meats that we consumed was insane. Today, the scale at which we are expanding and the scale at which we consume, it is just not possible to eat that kind of varieties. And it is systems have made it in like they have there are large organizations and systems that have promoted certain grains and certain staples to be mass produced so that it can feed the most number of people. We look at our dietary patterns being dependent on 4 or 5 staples. There is wheat, there is rice, there is corn, there is soybean. These are like 4 or 5 ingredients that form the major chunk of our
which are all carbohydrates.
not just carbohydrates, a lot of things that we consume. I mean, if you were to look at 10 products on a supermarket shelf, you would find corn as a component in them, soybean as a component in them, gluten as a component in them. Rice, of course, is a staple for us. I mean, I'm just saying the way a product is designed, it takes in components from these 4 or 5 ingredients. The meats that you eat today, you're a non-vegetarian, right? You eat the meats, the variety of meats that you eat it today. Can you count it on one hand, or do you eat meats that are more than on one hand? I'm not talking about
Actually,
food. I'm just talking
because I'm a only I eat egg and chicken only,
exactly. You
and
just eat egg and
occasionally,
chicken, right? You just eat egg and chicken, which is very similar to what a lot of people do. They eat chicken, they eat beef, they eat pork, and maybe lamb and goat meat a bit. Seafood is a little fun thing, but over there also it is slowly becoming that there are only 15 or 20 fishes that the entire market has at today's date. There is a level of homogeneity that's coming in. It is inevitable as globalization takes its way through the world. More and we will more and more move towards a direction where there are just a set of 40 or 50 ingredients that the entire world will eat as a major source of their nutrition. I guess this will continue to happen till a point of time where variety will become novel again, where McDonald's food from McDonald's or food from KFC or food from other such massive brands that have been successful abroad do not become novelty value, but a local variety of rice that is about to become extinct, or something like a local variety of a millet becomes more important, and the novelty and the beauty of that ingredient takes precedence. And slowly
Yeah.
from that level of homogeneity, we will again move away to a line of variety. I think it's like one sine wave. There are crests and there are troughs, and there is expansion and there is cohesion
Correct.
happening.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is
I can remember like 2, 3 instances of different conversations I've had with multiple people.
right.
So one is with Balkrishna Doshi in the 100th episode,
Okay.
where I asked him that why our cities started looking the same,
Right.
and to that he gave a brilliant answer saying that because architects are no longer poets.
Right.
So yeah,
Okay.
I mean the craft and the art side of things, and
Right.
one with Atul Pethe, who's like another big playwright
Okay.
in the Marathi industry, and he uses the word called as sapatikaran. So
Sapatikaran.
we have this sapatikaran, sapat हो रहा है मतलब सब
Okay.
कुछ
Flat.
flat
It's
हो रहा
flattening. The
है.
curve is flattening. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And obviously, uh, I mean, what you said, if we can generally conclude by like Swami Vivekananda's like one famous line which says that there are 1,000 years of forest and then 1,000 years of city,
Huh.
and again 1,000 years of forest. So and the cycle continues.
And the cycle continues. That's a fantastic way to put it. I think that sums up exactly what I'm trying to say. That crest and
Yeah,
trough thing. That's a beautiful way to put it.
yeah, yeah. Cool. I think on that note, I understand this is really not fulfilling my hunger to know more about food because there's tons of things to be discussed.
Right.
But just given the format in which we have planned this, I think this is a good note to end this. Thanks, Ashwin, for giving your time.
Thank you
All
so
the
much.
best
No.
for your uh, kitchen in Bombay. And if people have to follow what you do, Instagram, what's the handle? Bhojan.
I'm called Bhojanam Yojanam. BHOJANAM
Bhojanam Yojanam.
YOJANAM. Bhojanam Yojanam on Instagram. And that's my kitchen is called Milliways Inc. MILLIWAYSINC.
Yeah.
That's the name of the kitchen that I run along with my partner Yash Rajpal. So that's in South Bombay.
Oh, nice, nice. So yeah, I mean, do go and visit those who are in Bombay or coming to Bombay after the Corona thing. So yeah, thanks, Ashwin.
Thank you so
It
much
was
for
fun
having me
talking.
over. It was such a nice talk, and it was so nice to like exercise my brain on such wonderful things to think about.
Oh,
Thank you so
thanks,
much.
Thanks.
And that's it from today's Gyan session. Catch us on iTunes, Savan, Stitcher, or any podcasting app you use. Do rate us on iTunes and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Stay tuned for more Gyan on Audiogyan.com. Till then, bye.